I went to the ATM one morning, just like I had for decades. The receipt printed back said $0, every cent, gone. When I asked the bank manager, he said, "Your son emptied the account. He had the paperwork you signed." My own boy had used my trust against me, with his girlfriend whispering in the background. It felt like the floor gave out beneath me. Money was one thing, but the pocket watch my late wife told me to pass on to my grandson, it was pawned, too. What they didn't know, I had copies of the forged papers, and the pawnshop's camera saw everything. I walked out silent, holding that evidence close. But silence wasn't weakness. It was my weapon. Do you want to know how a father turns betrayal into justice? Stay with me through the whole story. And comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far my voice travels tonight. The air in Akron still carried that crisp bite of early spring, the kind that makes a man pull his coat tighter around his chest as he takes the same walk he's taken for years. Every first Friday, like clockwork, the routine was the same. Stop at the corner ATM, withdraw enough cash to cover groceries, utilities, maybe a little treat from the bakery down on Exchange Street. That rhythm had been my anchor since Evelyn passed. It gave the days some order. Sliding the card into the slot felt as ordinary as tying a shoelace. Fingers moved by habit. The 4-digit PIN entered without thought. The machine hummed, the screen flickered, and then came the soft whir of the printer. I expected to see the familiar numbers, something steady, something safe. Instead, that small white slip felt heavier than a brick in my hand. Balance, $0. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The hum of cars at the intersection dulled. The birds overhead fell silent. My eyes blinked at the paper as though they'd misread. Surely, this was a mistake, some glitch in the system, but no matter how many times the numbers were reread, they stayed the same. 0. Nothing. Decades of savings gone as though they'd been erased with the push of a button. A tightness formed in my chest. Not just fear, but something deeper. A kind of betrayal I couldn't yet name. I tried again, hoping the screen would flash a correction. That another receipt would spit out with the right balance, the real one. But each time, the machine mocked me with the same hollow truth. People passed on the sidewalk, carrying shopping bags and coffees, none of them aware that my life had just been stripped bare by a tiny piece of paper. Hands trembling. I stuffed the slip into my pocket. The March wind cut across my face as I turned toward the bank entrance. The routine had cracked wide open, and something told me this wasn't just about numbers on a screen. It was about trust, and maybe something far worse. Inside, the air was warmer, tinged with the faint smell of carpet cleaner and ink. A young teller greeted me with a polite smile, but I asked for Clifton Yates, the bank manager. He'd known me for years. If anyone could clear this up, it was him. Sitting across from his oak desk, I slid the receipt forward. "There's been a mistake," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. Clifton adjusted his glasses, tapped at his keyboard. His expression shifted from routine courtesy to something heavier. "Mr. Whitmore," he began carefully, "there haven't been any errors. All withdrawals were authorized." The words snagged in my ears. Authorized? By who? His eyes didn't quite meet mine. He turned the monitor slightly, and there it was in black and white. "Your son, Darius Holloway." The name struck like a hammer. For years I had held on to hope that Darius would steady himself, that the reckless streak in him would fade with age. Now, the thought that he'd emptied everything I had, it felt like someone had cut the ground out from under me. Clifton cleared his throat. "There's also this." He slid over a scanned document. My signature sat at the bottom, clear and undeniable. Above it, power of attorney. Darius's name filled the line of authorization. Memory stirred, months back. Darius had placed papers in front of me. "It's just to help you with bills. Dad, make things easier in case you get tired of dealing with the bank." He'd said it so casually, so convincingly. I had signed, not wanting to seem distrustful, not realizing I'd handed him the keys to everything I owned. The paper shook in my hands. It was such a simple form, no more than a few paragraphs, but it carried the weight of my entire life. Trust reduced to ink on a page. Clifton's voice softened. "I know this isn't easy. You should talk to him." I folded the document carefully, almost reverently, and slipped it into my coat pocket along with the receipt. My legs felt stiff as I rose. "Thank you," I said, though the words carried no gratitude, only formality. Stepping outside, the afternoon sun seemed too bright, almost cruel in its warmth. Traffic rolled by. People laughed near the cafe across the street, but all I saw was that slip of paper. My breath clouded in the chilly air as I whispered under it, the words tasting like ash. "What did you do to us, Darius?" The wind caught the corner of the receipt sticking from my pocket, as though trying to tear it free. I clutched it tighter, because it was the only proof I had left, not just of the empty account, but of the betrayal that had carved a hollow in my chest. The phone rang just as dusk settled over the neighborhood. The old clock on the mantel ticked louder than usual, each second dragging as if warning something I wasn't ready to hear. Picking up the receiver, the voice on the other end came casual, too casual. "Dad, don't make a fuss. You'll manage." Darius, my boy, the same voice that once called me hero when I carried him on my shoulders after Little League games, now flat and dismissive, it sliced deeper than any stranger's insult could. I tightened my grip on the phone. "Darius? Why?" The question tumbled out quieter than I expected, almost trembling, but I forced control into it. "For us, Dad, for the future. You wouldn't understand." The words sank like stones. The future? My future had been traded for bills, for savings, for meals skipped so he could have new shoes, my retirement, my late wife's careful grocery coupons, every hour spent at the mill, all of it, swept into some vague excuse wrapped in his girlfriend's shadow. "You emptied everything," I said, steady but hoarse. A pause, then a sigh from him, like I was a child nagging. "Look, just meet us tomorrow. We'll explain. It's not what you think." I wanted to demand answers right then, but silence pressed hard. Finally, I muttered, "Tomorrow, then." The line clicked dead before I could add more. The house felt larger when the phone went silent. Larger and emptier. I turned toward the nightstand where that crumpled ATM slip still lay. Its numbers, $0, mocking me with every glance. Rest was impossible. I sat in the dark kitchen, the chair across from me empty. The chair my Evelyn once filled with soft laughter. The receipt stared back at me, a reminder of how little remained. Sleep never came. By morning, the sky was washed pale gray. I tucked the receipt and the power of attorney copy into my coat pocket and made the slow walk to the diner downtown. The smell of frying bacon hit before I even opened the door. Normally, it would bring comfort. Today, it turned my stomach. There they were. Darius, hunched slightly, eyes darting. Beside him sat Marla, her posture tall, her lipstick sharp, a smirk already tugging at her lips. She didn't wait for me to speak. "Old men cling to pennies," she said with a laugh that carried across the booths. "We're building a life. You should be proud he's thinking bigger." My son's eyes stayed fixed on his coffee, hands cupped like a boy waiting for orders. I slid into the booth, my voice low. "You emptied my life's work." Darius shifted, throat tightening, but Marla only leaned closer to him, nails tapping on his sleeve as if he were a prize she'd already won. "You'll be fine. Social Security, right? Don't be dramatic." Every word scraped raw. The other diners clinked forks, sipped coffee, all unaware that my entire life was being erased in the corner booth. The receipt in my pocket crinkled as my hand clenched. Anger rose, sharp and hot, but it stayed trapped beneath restraint. I had learned long ago, yelling only gives power to the wrong people. I stood before my voice betrayed me, eyes steady on Darius. He wouldn't look back. I walked toward the door, their muffled laughter trailing behind. Outside, spring air bit cold against my face. My fists tightened, jaw set. Across the glass, Marla threw her head back in laughter, her hand locked on my son's arm like a shackle he didn't even see. "This isn't just my son's choice," I whispered. "It's her." The weight of that truth sank deep, heavier than the empty account slip. Betrayal no longer belonged only to Darius. It had a face, a smile, a laugh that echoed even as I stepped away. The shadows of evening stretched long on the sidewalk as I walked away from the diner, each step pulling me further into a future I never imagined facing. The night after that meeting at the diner stretched on without mercy. Shadows pressed against the walls of the house, and every creak of the old floorboards reminded me how empty it had become since Evelyn passed. Sitting in the living room, I reached for the drawer where my father's pocket watch had always rested. It had been there for decades, untouched by anything but careful hands. The drawer slid open with its familiar squeak, but the space inside was bare. My heart sank. The little indentation in the velvet lining where the watch used to sit was still there, but the weight was gone. My fingers swept the hollow, as though maybe it had simply slipped out of sight. Nothing. That watch wasn't just a timepiece. It was the only thing left from my father, and Evelyn had pressed it into my palm before she died. "Pass it to Jonas someday," she whispered, frail but insistent. Now even that was gone. Money might be squandered, but heritage, our story, that was sacred. A fury rose, quiet but hot. This wasn't a mistake. Darius or Marla had come into this house, into the sanctity of these walls, and taken it. They didn't just want dollars, they wanted erasure. My breath tightened. Betrayal cut deeper when it touched memory, not just the pocket. The following morning, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of blooming lilacs along the street. I headed toward the churchyard, a place that once brought comfort. But comfort slipped away when I caught the glances. Neighbors paused in their yard work, voices dropping low. "He's lost everything," one whispered. "His own son," another added, pity woven into the words. Each murmur hit harder than the last. It wasn't just my burden anymore. It was gossip, a stain visible to everyone. Eleanor Briggs, who had brought casseroles after Evelyn's funeral, crossed the street quickly when she saw me. No wave, no hello, just avoidance. My shame wasn't private, it was on display. And I had no defense. I stopped by the church gate, pressing my hand against the cold iron. For a moment, I thought about speaking, explaining, defending, but what good would it do? Words wouldn't erase the receipt in my pocket, or the watch that was no longer in its place. Silence felt safer. Silence meant they couldn't twist my pain into more whispers. My fingers dug into my coat pocket, gripping only emptiness where the watch should have been. That hollowness became a weight. A father's silence wasn't cowardice. It was survival. Yet anger burned under that quiet, a steady flame that refused to go out. As I turned back toward home, a small voice called out, "Grandpa?" Jonas stood there, school bag slung over one shoulder, eyes too honest for a world like this. His brow furrowed. "People are talking about you. Is it true?" The question hung in the air heavier than any accusation. My lips parted, but no sound came. Looking into his eyes, I saw the innocence Evelyn had wanted me to protect. What could I possibly say? That his father had stripped us bare, piece by piece. I managed only silence, and that silence carried more truth than words ever could. Jonas's knock came softer than usual, almost hesitant, but it stirred me from the quiet house. Evening shadows stretched across the kitchen floor as I opened the door. There he stood, clutching a manila envelope like it might burn him. His eyes darted, searching my face for permission. We sat at the kitchen table where Evelyn once laid out supper. Jonas pulled out a stack of printed emails, laying them out like puzzle pieces that could never fit back together. My eyes fell on the first line, the cold type staring up at me. "Move every last dollar. Do it before the billing cycle." Marla's name sat above the words like a signature of contempt. Another message, short, shaky. "Dad won't notice right away." The sender, Darius, my own son. The room spun for a moment. A pit opened inside, deeper than the empty balance slip. Jonas whispered, almost afraid. "I found these on the family computer at Mom's. I thought, you should see." The boy's bravery hit me like a hand on my shoulder. Grief curdled into something harder, something steadier. My voice caught, but I managed to murmur, You did the right thing, son. He gave a small nod, though his hands trembled as he pulled the papers closer, making sure I saw every damning word. That night stretched long. I fought the urge to snatch the phone and call Darius, to demand answers, to scream, but memory of Clifton Yates's calm advice echoed. Patience, proof, process. Rage would give them fuel. Silence might be my only weapon. Jonas broke the silence with a quiet suggestion. Grandpa, we should take this to Mr. Yates first thing. He'll know what to do. His tone carried more certainty than his young years should have allowed. I gathered the ATM slip, the power of attorney copy, and Jonas's printed emails, stacking them neat and square as if order could steady my heart. Morning arrived pale and damp, the kind of Akron spring day that clings to the bones. Jonas walked beside me into the bank, his small shoulders set with determination. Clifton Yates met us in his glass-walled office. The sunlight cut through too sharp, making our private pain feel exposed. I slid the packet across the desk. Clifton read quietly, lips tightening as his eyes scanned each page. He leaned back at last, folding his hands. Mr. Whitmore, this is more than mismanagement. This could fall under elder financial exploitation. The words settled heavy but oddly relieving. For the first time, someone named what I had been too ashamed to admit. Clifton tapped at his computer, filing notes. The power of attorney gave your son authority. But these emails, this pressure from Marla, changed the frame. I can flag this as suspicious activity. He clicked through forms, typed longer than I thought necessary, then printed a sheet. Across the top, account temporarily frozen, pending review. He handed it to me with careful gravity. This will hold while we escalate. I'll alert our risk team. Keep your documents safe. And see, if things worsen, you may need to contact Adult Protective Services. Jonas's eyes widened at the phrase, but Clifton gave him a steady look. You helped your grandfather today. Don't forget that. We stepped back into the lobby, sunlight spilling through the tall windows. Outside, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Turning to Jonas, words came easier than expected. You saved me, kid. I promise, I'll protect your future, even if it means losing my son. His hand squeezed mine, firm and small. We still have each other, Grandpa. That quiet promise should have been enough for the day, but fate wasn't done. As we moved toward the door, a sharp ping echoed from Clifton's office. He rushed back to his screen, eyes narrowing. They're trying again, he said, voice urgent. Right now, another branch. The world seemed to tilt. Jonas and I exchanged a look. Fear, resolve, bloodlines clashing with betrayal. My hand tightened around the packet of proofs, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. The fight was no longer private. The phone was already ringing as Jonas and I stepped into the cool evening air outside the bank. We hadn't even made it to the car when the screen lit up. Darius Holloway. For a moment, the world went still. The hum of traffic, the shuffle of Jonas's sneakers beside me, even the spring wind, all paused. I pressed the green button. Yes, son. His voice exploded through the speaker, hot and jagged. You froze the account. What did you do? The sheer fury in his tone made Jonas flinch. It dug into me, too, though not in the way he might have hoped. There was a sting, yes, but underneath it, a kind of weary sadness. I kept my tone calm. I didn't do anything but protect what was left. You had no right, Darius spat. That money was ours. You think you can just take it back after everything I've done? The words made my stomach tighten. Ours. He said it like we were partners in some plan, not father and son. My grip on the phone hardened. It wasn't ours, I said slowly, deliberately. It was mine. Every hour of overtime. Every dime from your mother's sewing money. Every sacrifice we made when you were little, so you could have shoes on your feet and food in your belly. That's what you emptied out. For a beat there was silence. Then, faintly in the background, her voice slithered through the line. Marla. Tell him he's senile. Tell him you'll take care of it. My chest burned. It wasn't just that she was there. It was that he let her speak through him. "Dad," Darius growled, parroting her tone. "You're not well. Everyone knows it. You're confused, and I'm just helping." Something in me hardened, like concrete setting. My hand went instinctively to the envelope tucked in my coat. ATM slip, power of attorney copy, Jonas's printed emails, evidence, proof of who was confused and who wasn't. "You listen to me carefully," I said, lowering my voice until each word came out sharp as glass. The bank flagged this as exploitation. "Keep pressing, and you'll face more than me. You'll face the law," he scoffed, the sound dripping with contempt. "You're being dramatic. You've lost it." "This isn't about drama," I answered. "It's about dignity, and you've sold yours cheap." Jonas's eyes widened at the words, but I didn't look away from the horizon. My son's ragged breathing filled the line. Then came the hiss, bitter as bile. "You'll regret this, old man." The ache in my chest was familiar, the kind that doesn't fade with time, but I didn't let him have the last word. "I already do," I whispered, and cut the line myself. Silence fell heavy. Jonas tugged gently at my sleeve. "Grandpa, what now?" I looked down at him, this boy who hadn't asked for any of it, his face pale, his trust fragile. "Now we prepare," I said, voice steady even as my insides shook. Back home, the kitchen felt colder than usual. I set the phone down on the table, beside the papers that had become my shield. Jonas sat across from me, his chin resting on his hands, eyes searching mine for answers I wasn't sure I had. "This is bigger than money now," I told him. "It's about who we are, what we stand for." Before he could answer, a knock rattled the front door. I rose slowly, every bone in my body weighted with dread. When I opened it, Eleanor Briggs stood on the porch. Her face was pale, her voice hushed. "I think you should see this," she whispered, pressing a folded flyer into my hand. The porch light flickered as I unfolded it, my hands trembling. A pawn shop advertisement, and right there in black and white, my father's pocket watch, tagged with a price and a date. The flyer crinkled in my hand as I stared at the black and white image. My father's pocket watch, etched with initials worn faint over decades, sat in a pawn shop case, tagged with a number, a price, and a date stamped just yesterday. Eleanor had walked back into the night after pressing it into my palm, her eyes avoiding mine. She didn't need to say anything. The shame was written across her face. Jonas leaned over my shoulder, squinting at the faded ink. "That's it, isn't it? The one Grandma said you'd pass on to me someday." His voice cracked as though someone had broken something inside him too. "It's the one," I whispered, though my chest felt too tight to breathe. The watch had survived wars, recessions, and funerals. It hadn't survived my son. Jonas's jaw stiffened. "We can't let this go, Grandpa. We have to get it back." Resolve cut through the fog that had held me since the bank. If they could pawn off something as sacred as that watch, there was no bottom to how far they would fall. "Then we're going tonight," I said, "but you stay close to me." The pawn shop sat hunched on the corner of Akron's east side, its flickering neon sign buzzing like a tired insect. Inside, the air was stale with dust and desperation, rows of guitars, old televisions, and tools stacked along the walls told silent stories of folks who'd given up more than they wanted to. Behind the counter stood Vernon Clegg, a man whose beard looked like it hadn't met soap in a week. He raised an eyebrow when we walked in. "Evening? Looking to buy? Or sell back?" I ignored the greeting. My eyes locked on the glass case under the yellow light. There it was, the pocket watch, gleaming faintly, its cracked leather chain curled like a dead vine. My reflection in the glass merged with it, lined face, weary eyes. A man bound to his past. "That watch," I said, voice steady. "It was stolen from me." Vernon shifted his weight, arms crossing. "Lot of stories come through here." "Got proof it's yours?" Jonas's fists balled at his sides. I placed a hand on his shoulder before the boy could erupt. "Who brought it in?" I asked. Vernon hesitated, glancing toward the back room. His voice dropped. Tall man, nervous as a rabbit. Red-headed woman did all the talking. Paid cash. No questions asked. The words struck like hammer blows. Darius and Marla, smug even here, stripping away the last threads of our family's history. Jonas stepped forward. That's them. We knew it. I held him back again, my hand firm on his arm. Vernon looked uncomfortable now, licking his lips. Look, I got cameras. All right, but if they find out I talked, you're already in it, I interrupted, lowering my tone but not my gaze. If I walk out of here empty-handed, you're complicit. The silence stretched. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than both our breaths. Finally, Vernon bent down, fumbled in a drawer, and slid a small USB stick across the counter. Footage, he muttered, and the receipt, signed by her. Fake name, but handwriting's as good as a fingerprint. I picked it up, examining the scrawl. Marla's flourish on the V gave her away. My stomach clenched. She hadn't just taken money, she'd carved her name into my ruin. You'll testify if asked, I said quietly. Vernon looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Don't drag me too deep, old man. I didn't answer. Instead, I motioned to the watch. That too. With a resigned sigh, he unlocked the case and placed it in my palm. The weight of it settled into me like an anchor and a weapon both. Outside. The air was colder than it had any right to be. Jonas looked up at me, eyes bright but confused. We have them now, don't we? Proof, evidence, everything. The watch pressed against my palm, solid and warm. Evidence is one thing, I said slowly. Convincing the world, convincing family, that's another. Jonas opened his mouth to speak again, but my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. The glow of the screen cut through the dark. A message. From Darius. We need to talk. Tonight. The words hung there, heavy as a verdict. Jonas swallowed hard. Grandpa, are you going to meet him? The night stretched around us, filled with more shadows than answers. The text from Darius still burned on the screen of my phone. We need to talk. Tonight. But the night passed in silence. Jonas sat across the table, watching me, while rain pattered against the roof. The phone never rang again. By morning, another message came. Couldn't make last night. Meet late morning at the diner. The rain hadn't stopped. It fell heavier, drumming against the windows as I pulled on my old coat. Jonas insisted he should come, but I shook my head. This is something I need to face alone. He stared at me as if weighing whether to argue, then nodded. I stepped out into the damp air, every footstep splashing against shallow puddles. The diner was only a few blocks away, but the walk felt longer than any road I'd taken in years. Darius was already inside, tucked in the far corner booth. He looked older somehow, shadows under his eyes. But when I approached, he didn't rise, didn't smile. Marla sat beside him, lips painted, posture confident, a presence that filled more space than the booth allowed. Dad, Darius muttered, eyes fixed on the napkin holder. Let's talk about the truth, I said, easing into the opposite seat. My voice was calm, though the weight of sleepless hours pressed on my chest. I know about the watch. Marla's smile was razor sharp. Watch? You mean the trinket you left lying around? Funny thing about memory at your age, you misplace so much. Darius flinched, but he didn't speak. He didn't defend me, didn't even defend himself. He just sat there, silent. Marla slid a thin folder across the table. Before you embarrass yourself further, maybe you should take a look at this. Inside were bank documents, transaction lists, withdrawals, highlighted in red. Except the formatting was wrong, timestamps too perfect, as though generated by a hand too eager, and at the bottom, a photocopied power of attorney form with my own signature blurred, cropped to fit. Marla tapped her nail against it. See? These were your choices. You withdrew the money. Maybe you don't remember. Maybe you're slipping. But the bank will believe records over stories. A murmur rose behind me. The diner wasn't empty. Folks at nearby tables had caught enough words to stir their curiosity. I felt their eyes, their whispers pricking my back. The coffee cup in my hands trembled, dark liquid spilling onto the table. The stain spread like a wound across the cheap paper napkin. Darius cleared his throat, voice thin. Maybe it's better if you just let things be, Dad. For a moment, the room spun. Betrayal wasn't shouted this time. It was whispered, signed, and slid across a sticky diner table. I stood slowly, leaving the folder where it lay. My knees stiffened, but I didn't let them see me falter. I walked past the stairs, out into the rain. Outside, Eleanor Briggs was waiting under a dripping umbrella. She glanced at me with pity, then leaned close. They're spreading it. Arlen, folks are saying you're losing it, that you don't know what you're signing or doing anymore. The words cut deeper than Marla's smirk. Reputation, once gone, was harder to reclaim than money. I nodded, unable to speak, and walked on. The rain pressed harder against my shoulders. By the time I got home, Jonas was pacing near the kitchen window. He rushed to me. What happened? They're not just stealing, Jonas. They're rewriting me, making me look like a man who doesn't know his own mind. His eyes widened, fists clenched. They can't do that. They already are. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small USB drive Vernon had given me, cool and heavy in my palm. If this doesn't clear me, nothing will. Jonas looked at me, steady, fierce for his age. Then we need someone who won't be afraid to hear the truth. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder rolling low, as though the sky itself echoed the war spilling into my home. Eleanor's living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old wood. Curtains were drawn against the spring rain outside, muting the light to a dim glow. She'd insisted her house was the only neutral ground where words could be spoken, without shouting across fences or whispered judgment in diners. I sat stiffly in the armchair, Jonas close to my side, his small hand clutching my sleeve. The boy's silence spoke louder than any words. He was afraid, but more than that, he wanted to see if truth could still matter in our family. The front door creaked. Darius stepped in first, shoulders hunched, his face pale as if he already knew the verdict. Marla followed, chin high, eyes sweeping the room with practiced confidence. She wore a smirk, the kind meant to disarm and dominate all at once. My pulse steadied. This wasn't going to be a conversation, it was a trial. Arlen, she began, sugary sweet. I'm glad you agreed to meet. Families shouldn't be torn apart by confusion. She slid into the sofa like she owned the place. Darius sat beside her, but kept his gaze fixed on the floorboards. I leaned forward. Confusion is one thing. Marla, theft is another. Her smile widened as she pulled out a sheaf of papers. Oh, you mean these? She fanned them theatrically. Bank withdrawals, all signed by you. Darius has been so patient, covering for your lapses. But it's gone too far. People are beginning to talk. They say you're slipping. The words burned, but I let them hang in the air. Jonas stiffened beside me, whispering, Grandpa. His voice cracked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. I reached for the folder I'd carried beneath my coat. If I am confused, then explain this. Slowly, I laid the pawn shop receipt on Eleanor's coffee table. The signature, Marla's hand, sloppy in its forgery, stared back at us before she could scoff. Eleanor fetched the small TV she used for church meetings. With Jonas's help, I slid the USB drive into its port. The grainy footage appeared, Vernon Clegg's pawn shop, fluorescent lights humming. Darius stood nervously at the counter, Marla at his side, pushing the pocket watch across the glass, the watch that had belonged to my father, the one Evelyn had pressed into my hand with her last breath, saying it should one day be Jonas's. Gasps filled the room. Eleanor's hand shot to her mouth. Jonas leaned closer, whispering in awe. They can't deny this. Marla's face drained of color. Then she lashed out, voice shrill. This proves nothing. I turned to Darius. You sold your grandfather's watch. What won't you sell? Son? He opened his mouth, closed it again. His lips trembled. Dad, His voice barely a whisper, but Marla clamped her hand on his arm, dragging him back into silence. Say nothing, she hissed. The quiet in the room was heavier than any shout. Darius's silence condemned him more than confession ever could. His shoulders sagged under the weight of shame, or perhaps fear of her. Finally, Eleanor rose, trembling but resolute. This isn't just family business anymore. This is criminal. I straightened, the exhaustion of months pressing against me, but my voice remained steady. Then let the law decide. Marla shot up, yanking Darius with her. She spat toward me, venom in every syllable. You'll regret this, old man. The door slammed behind them, her heels clicking furiously down the porch. The room was still except for Jonas's quick breaths. Eleanor placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me. Arlen, you've done what many wouldn't. You've stood firm. I looked at Jonas, at the boy's wide, searching eyes. It's only begun, I said quietly, but at least the truth is no longer mine alone to carry. Outside, the storm rolled heavier, thunder shaking the windows as if echoing the fracture inside my family. The morning light filtered weakly through my curtains, yet it carried no warmth. Sleep had been fractured, haunted by the voices that had filled Eleanor's living room the night before. I rose slowly, joints aching, not just from age, but from the heaviness that had settled inside me. My kitchen table still bore the evidence, the pawnshop receipt, the USB drive, and the envelope Jonas had printed. Proof, stacked neatly, but proof that felt like a double-edged sword. It cut them. Yes, but it cut me too. When I stepped outside, the air was sharp. Early spring air, the kind that usually carried the promise of renewal. But today, it carried whispers. My neighbors' heads tilted just slightly as I passed. Some nodded, their faces full of pity, while others shifted their gaze elsewhere, pretending not to see me at all. The silence pressed harder than any words. My mailbox was stuffed to the brim, but as I sifted through, I found nothing but bills and advertisements. No note from Darius, no apology. No recognition of what had been lost between us. I closed the lid slowly. That hollow sound seemed to echo inside me. Later that morning, Eleanor stopped by with her steady stride and her quiet strength. She carried a casserole, as if food could soften betrayal. Setting it down, she leaned against the counter, voice low. They're saying you doctored that video, Arlen, that it's you who's trying to make Darius and Marla look bad. I let out a breath, heavy with disbelief. She's faster than I thought. Lies spread quicker than truth. Eleanor's eyes met mine, unwavering. Half the congregation is already talking. Some believe you. Others, well, you know how people are when they smell scandal. I had lived in Akron all my life. I had mowed lawns for neighbors, driven casseroles to funerals, shoveled sidewalks when snow piled high. And now, those same neighbors eyed me as though I were the thief. Not Darius, not Marla, me. It stung deeper than I cared to admit. By the afternoon, I tried to distract myself with chores. The back gate had sagged for months. Evelyn used to remind me to fix it. Now it was Jonas who stood beside me, holding nails and wood. His small hands passed me tools with the kind of determination that didn't match his years. "Grandpa," he said, brow furrowed as he watched me hammer, "you don't need everyone to believe you. I know the truth. That's enough, right?" I stopped mid-swing. His words landed heavier than the hammer ever could. "It should be enough," I whispered. "But I don't want you to grow up thinking silence wins." Jonas tightened the gate's latch and smiled faintly. "Then don't be silent. Show them." That boy, no older than 13, held me up more than any adult had in weeks. His presence steadied me, even as the weight of the town's judgment bore down. That night, as shadows lengthened, I noticed headlights sweep across my blinds. A car idled outside my house. My heart recognized it before my eyes confirmed it. Darius's old sedan, parked crooked at the curb. Through the slats, I saw him pacing. His movements were restless, jerky, the way a man moved when torn in two. He raised his phone once, lowered it, shoved it into his pocket. Then he leaned against the hood, rubbing his face with both hands. I stood frozen, only feet away, yet a lifetime apart. I wanted to fling open the door, to call his name, to demand he step inside and face me like the sun I raised. But the moment flickered and died. His car engine roared, headlights cutting through the street, and then he was gone. The empty street mocked me. He was close, closer than he had been in weeks, yet still out of reach. Near midnight, Eleanor returned, rain dripping from her umbrella, urgency in her tone. "Arlen, I shouldn't even be here this late, but I couldn't keep this to myself. Marla's planning something, and she wants to finish this before you can act." I straightened, the exhaustion in my bones replaced by cold clarity. "Finish this? What else could she take? She's pushing a story, talking about your competence. Word is she wants to make it official, guardianship, maybe even control over what you have left." I gripped the back of a chair, steadying myself. So that was her endgame. Not just money. Control. The ache in my chest gave way to steel. I walked to the phone, picked up the receiver, and dialed Clifton Yates. When his steady voice came through, I didn't waste a greeting. "We need to meet. Now." There was a pause. Then Clifton said, "I wondered how long it would take for you to call." I held the receiver tighter, voice firm, each word deliberate. "Clifton, I'm ready to bring everything into the light." Clifton's office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the sort of ordinary scent that had no business carrying such heavy truths. He closed the blinds before sliding a thick folder across the desk. Its weight in my hands wasn't paper. It was betrayal given form. "These," he said quietly, "are the transaction trails and receipts tied to your son and Marla. I thought you should see them before anyone else does." The pages rustled under my fingers. Dates, amounts, transfers, months of siphoning my savings. Each line item was another blow, another notch carved out of a life I had built with calloused hands. Then came the pawn receipts, my wife's locket, my father's pocket watch, even the old service medals I thought no one cared about. "Marla orchestrated most of it," Clifton continued, tapping a page with his pen. "Your son signed where she told him to. Some accounts are in her name, others in his. It's all there." The folder lay like a stone in my lap. For a moment, the room blurred as memories flooded in. Evelyn fastening that locket around her neck. My father slipping his watch into my palm the day I graduated. Now, both reduced to evidence tags. It wasn't just money. It was lineage. It was my bloodline stripped bare. I closed the folder slowly, steadying my voice. "Thank you, Clifton. I'll do what needs doing." He nodded, his eyes carrying a sympathy that words couldn't offer. By evening, the house sat quiet until the pounding at the front door broke it apart. Jonas looked up from his schoolwork, alarm wide in his eyes. I motioned him to stay put before opening the door. Marla stood there, rain streaking her hair, a smirk etched sharp across her face. She shoved a cream envelope into my chest. "Read it," she sneered. The paper was dressed up to look official, bold headers, mock legal language. It claimed I was incompetent, unfit to manage my affairs. Worse, it demanded Jonas's guardianship be reassigned, as though my grandson were some pawn to be shuffled between hands. Marla's voice dripped with venom. "You'll be the one locked away, old man, not us." I read it slowly, tracing every word, noting the sloppy formatting, the fake signatures. It was as flimsy as her bravado. Without a word, I tore the paper down the middle, then into quarters, the pieces falling between us like dead leaves. Her eyes flared. "You think that scares me?" From the driveway. Darius sat in the car, headlights glaring against the wet pavement. His face was pale, lips pressed tight. He didn't move, didn't get out, just watched, like a prisoner behind his own glass. My heart cracked at the sight, but I refused to let her see the pain. Jonas stepped forward then, his small voice cutting through the rain. "She's lying. Grandpa, I know it." That truth, simple as it was, steadied me. I met Marla's glare without flinching. "You can forge papers, You can spread lies, but you can't erase the truth, and the truth has a way of surfacing. For the first time she faltered, only for a breath, but I saw it, the flash of doubt in her eyes. Then she spun on her heel, slamming the car door. The engine roared, and the car vanished down the slick road. The house felt heavy again once they were gone. I placed Clifton's folder in the desk drawer and turned the key. The papers inside were more than records now. They were weapons. And if Marla wanted war, then she'd get one, lit by the lamp of the law, not the shadows she thrived in. The phone rang. Eleanor's voice came across, trembling but urgent. "Arlen, I think Marla is planning to disappear tonight. With Darius." I gripped the receiver tighter, breath steadying. "Then tonight is when this ends." The phone call from Eleanor rattled through my bones, her voice thin with urgency. Marla and Darius had been seen with bags, heading toward the bus station. My heart pounded, not with surprise, but with the weight of inevitability. I grabbed the folder of documents Clifton had given me and tucked it beneath my arm. Jonas hovered by the doorway, eyes wide. "Grandpa, we're going too, right?" he asked. There was no hesitation. "Yes. This isn't just mine to carry anymore." The night air was sharp as we drove through Akron's nearly empty streets. The bus station stood under a flickering neon sign, its hum matching the anxious beat in my chest. Every shadow stretched long and broken, as though the world itself reflected the cracks in our family. Inside, the terminal smelled of damp concrete and burnt coffee. Travelers sat hunched with their bags, heads low, waiting for departures that promised escape. And there, near the ticket counter, I saw them, Darius, shifting from foot to foot, and Marla, her manicured nails tapping the counter impatiently. Her voice cut through the din. "Forget your father. This is our chance. You hesitate one more time, and I'll leave without you." I stepped closer, each footfall heavy. Darius turned, eyes wide, caught between shame and desperation. "Dad," he whispered, almost too soft to hear. "Son." My voice came steadier than I expected. "This is your last chance to choose right." Marla's head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. "You again. Haven't you ruined enough? He's mine now." Jonas gripped my sleeve, but I stood my ground. "You emptied accounts, sold heirlooms, smeared my name, but tonight, it ends." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "Ends? Old man, you'll die alone clutching scraps of paper. He's moving on with me." Before I could answer, a ripple spread through the station. Uniformed officers entered briskly, their radios crackling. Clifton's promise had not been idle. One officer approached, holding a folder of warrants. "Marla Vance," he called, "you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and elder exploitation." Chaos erupted. Marla's shriek echoed against the tiled walls. "It's a setup." She clawed at Darius's arm, but he pulled away, sobbing, his body collapsing into itself. "I never wanted this," he cried, voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to stop her." The officers snapped cold steel around Marla's wrists. The sound was like a gavel striking, final and unyielding. She twisted, spit flying, her venomous words flung at me. "This isn't over, Whitmore." But her rage no longer pierced me. I only felt the hollow ache where my son once stood. Hours later, the fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed above us. I sat across from Darius, separated by a sheet of glass. His eyes were red, his face pale, his hands trembling as he picked up the phone on his side. "Dad," he whispered, broken. I'm sorry." The words hung like fragile glass between us. I pressed the phone to my ear, my own hand shaking. "Sorry doesn't mend what you chose to break." His tears rolled unchecked, and for a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who used to run across the yard calling my name, not the man hollowed out by greed and influence. My heart cracked all over again. Jonas stood behind me, silent but steady, then placed his small hand over mine. That touch anchored me more than words ever could. When we left, the night air felt heavier. Eleanor waited outside, her face lined with fatigue, but her voice strong. "Marla won't stop, even behind bars. She'll fight." I nodded, the folder clutched against my chest. "Then we end this in court, with truth, not whispers." In the distance, the courthouse loomed, its stone steps lit by stark lamps. I stared at it, feeling the weight of decades, promises broken, trust shattered. My whisper carried only to myself. This is where the final reckoning begins. The courthouse steps looked taller than they should have, each one carrying the weight of everything that had been taken from me. Jonas kept pace beside me, his small hand wrapped tightly around mine. For a moment, I thought of all the men in my family who had walked steps like these before, into wars, into factories, into funerals. Now it was my turn, not to fight a battle with weapons, but with truth. Inside, the air felt charged. Neighbors filled the benches, some who had whispered against me, others who had stood silent but present, waiting for proof. Eleanor sat in the front row, her eyes fixed forward, her presence steady as an oak tree. Even Vernon Clegg, the pawnshop owner, shifted nervously on the wooden bench, summoned to face the part he'd played. And at the witness table, Clifton Yates waited with his files neatly stacked, calm as a man about to set down a verdict already written. When the gavel struck, silence fell heavy. Clifton spoke first. His testimony was meticulous. Every dollar withdrawn, every transfer rerouted, every heirloom pawned. He presented receipts, dates, and even grainy footage from Vernon's cameras. With each page turned, the weight of betrayal grew heavier. Not in my chest this time, but on Marla's shoulders. I could see it pressing down, her posture stiffening, her face blanching under the fluorescent lights. She tried to rise to her own defense, her voice syrupy, trembling just enough to mimic sincerity. "Your Honor, this man is confused. He's 74, widowed, alone. He's being manipulated by neighbors and bankers who want his estate. He doesn't remember half of what he signs." The words cut deep, not because they held truth vacant, but because they twisted it. For years, my age had been nothing but a number. Today she tried to weaponize it into a cage. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Whitmore, do you wish to speak?" Standing wasn't easy, but I rose without hesitation. My voice came steady, stronger than I thought it could. "I may be old, I may be widowed, but my mind is clear. That watch, that locket, those savings, they weren't just money. They were my life's work, and I never signed them away to greed. I trusted my son, and she," I nodded toward Marla, "turned that trust into a noose." The courtroom was so quiet. I could hear Jonas's breath behind me. I sat down, my body trembling, but not from fear. It was the tremor of truth finally being spoken aloud. The judge didn't take long. "Marla Vance, guilty of fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. You will face sentencing accordingly." The gavel struck again, its echo sounding less like wood on wood and more like chains breaking. Marla screamed, called me names, swore she would appeal, but the officer's hands were firm on her shoulders, their cuffs clicking shut like punctuation marks at the end of a long, bitter sentence. And then there was Darius, my boy, sitting pale and broken, eyes downcast. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he whispered, "I let her use me. I thought I was proving something, but all I did was betray the man who gave me everything." He asked for leniency, and for once, the judge showed mercy. Probation, restitution, no prison, but no dignity either. That, he would have to rebuild himself. Outside, the sun broke through clouds that had lingered all week. Eleanor embraced me, whispering, "You've reminded us all what resilience looks like." Vernon offered a hesitant handshake, mumbling an apology. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now met my eyes again, some even nodding with respect. Vindication doesn't erase scars, but it cleanses the wound enough for healing to start. That evening, Jonas and I sat on the porch, the sky painted orange and pink as if the world itself was exhaling after a storm. He leaned close, his voice small. "Grandpa, Are we safe now? I put an arm around him, pulling him close. Safe isn't something anyone hands you. Jonas, safe is something you defend, with truth, with love, with standing tall when it'd be easier to shrink. The porch light flicked on, casting our shadows long against the steps. For the first time in months, I felt those shadows didn't belong to fear, they belonged to legacy. Marla was led away in shackles earlier that day, her eyes still burning with hate, but powerless at last. She thought she'd stolen my future. But sitting there with Jonas's hand in mine, I realized she had done the opposite. She had reminded me, and maybe everyone watching, that a man's worth isn't written in bank slips or heirlooms. It's written in the dignity he refuses to surrender.